everybody? It's your boy Big Dave back with another episode of Culture Dad's Age of Sword and Cassette. So, Mr. Mike, we got a cool episode today.
Yeah, this is a topic near and dear to both of our hearts. You know, this is one of the things where when we first started, talking, you and I, this is one of the things that we kind of, we found that we had in common was a love of music and a love of heavy shit, and specifically a love of the guitar. So This is, it's going to be a good one, man.
Yeah, hell yeah. So, in my summation, right, when we talk about sonically, let's talk about artistically, the identity of the West, right? What comes to mind? You hear, like when you say Western civilization, you picture marble statues, and you hear piano things and classical music, and these kinds of things. But when I say what do you picture when I say modern Western civilization? You might picture trains and the Empire State Building, and then what do you hear? You probably hear some type of shredding guitar. At least I do, right? Mm-hmm. The electric guitar is one of the biggest innovations culturally that we have come up with in the last ever, right? It is a landmark. It is a pillar that signifies our chapter ending in the big saga, right? The electric guitar is something that was a really good innovation, and it spawned so many styles of music and became this gigantic industry and all of the above. And especially if you're a white dude growing up, and if you're a millennial or older, man, you wanted to play the electric guitar. You probably dabbled with it. You probably have one. You probably are a guitar player. You probably have favorite guitar players. You probably looked up to guitar players. And this is something that I did, that Mike did, and all of us did. And this is kind of like a rite of passage since like the 1940s and stuff, right? Everybody had their favorite guitar player, and it became a really special, iconic cultural staple in who we are as a people. So, Mr. Mike, how did you come into the electric guitar, and what was your inspiration? Like, what were your experiences?
That's a good question, actually. I was just beginning to think about it when, as you were talking there, about how I got into it. So my sort of genesis of being a guitar player actually goes back a long, long way to like when I was very young. I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 or something like that. And my dad, he was also a guitar player, and he was a bass player, specifically in like, a rock band that like made records and stuff. So I was always aware of this, from a fairly early age. But what I'm saying is that he was a music guy, and he had his own records. He had his like cassettes, and he had his own sort of like library of music that he loved. And like his thing was Motown for the most part, Motown and blues. That's like what he was all about, right? So very guitar heavy music himself. But for me, and he was also into a lot of other, like he had quite a wide range of tastes. And one of them was classical music. And, longtime listeners will know how much I love classical music, and you love classical music. We did a whole episode related to nationalist classical music. So this goes back a super long way for me. And one of the first musical experiences that I remember having, one of the deepest like musical impressions that was ever made on me, I remember was listening to a cassette with my dad. I had to have been about like this was super early, man. Like as early as I can really remember almost anything. Like I say, like maybe about 4 years old, maybe slightly older, but around that time, listening to this cassette. Yes, a cassette back in the day of this album called Parkening Plays Bach, which was a classical guitarist named Christopher Parkening. And like when like Bach himself was a devoutly religious man, and you can really hear it in his music. Somehow you can just hear like what they call Faustianism. I won't get into my objections to that term, but let's just go with it. You can hear the Faustian upward striving towards the Godhead, you know, like you climbing up the ladder of beings up towards like the Most High. You can get this out of Bach. This is why I get out of him. Maybe I'm sort of over describing it, but like for me, Bach is really the pinnacle of classical music. And this fellow named Christopher Parkening, as a classical guitarist, somehow is able to, now he's not the most technical, although he is technically sound, but he is not, like there are flashier classical guitar players that can play crazier stuff than he can. But somehow he's got the feel for the instrument that his interpretations of Bach really do sort of make you like it's almost like you're listening to Bach playing the guitar. He just has it. He is and for my money, he's the premier interpreter of Bach. So listening to this cassette of Parkening Plays Bach, I just remember listening to Cantata 140. It's called Sleepers Awake, and just having this intensely emotional moment where it's sitting with my dad and just break down crying listening to this music. So sublime, so beautiful. It is just like indescribable for me, like what power this particular piece of music has, and the whole album. You got to listen to it. So this is really the first kind of like, this is me getting a taste of what the guitar can do very, very early. The expressive power that it has, the orchestra in miniature that it can be. So that was my first foray into like, you know, really listening to guitar music. And then flash forward a little further, and I'm listening to a lot of what my dad's listening to. You know, I grew up in the 80s. I started playing guitar when I was 8, so this would have been late 1980s. I'm so fucking old, it's ridiculous. Listening to stuff like Michael Jackson's Thriller and Billy Joel, and like I'm just listening to the shit my dad had, right? Kind of thing. And somehow I decided, I begged my parents to let me start taking guitar lessons. I wanted to play the guitar. And I remember one Christmas, my parents bought me a little electric guitar. It had like a little speaker on the guitar, and bought my brother this little dinky drum set. And we had this little band together. Like I was 8, he would have been about 5 or something, 5 or 6.
It's wholesome.
Oh fuck yeah! No, it was so good, and we just played, and he eventually became an unbelievably talented drummer and like multi-instrumentalist. But for me, that's when I really got into the guitar, and I started learning. And my parents sent me to a like good guitar school. I actually went to the Royal Conservatory of Music, and eventually worked my way up over what would have been about 10 years to get my grade 6 classical guitar performance certificate and my grade 1 in rudiments. This is, you know, the performance is only getting about halfway to like their top level, which is, I believe, 12. And the rudiments is just what it sounds like. It's just the basics. So I eventually got to that point and was basically sort of like a very beginner level, like performing classical guitar player. And then like, at that stage, I'm about like 17 or 18 years old. And then, I mean, I'm skipping over a lot of my musical development. In the meantime, I got into rock music. And then after graduating from the conservatory, or not graduating, but like getting that certificate, I went on to teach guitar lessons, and I went on to play in bands and become a dissolute musician, and squander my 20s on all of that. And it was a great time, and I loved it, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. But yeah, so the guitar has been a huge part of my life, huge, for a very long time. In high school, a lot of people knew me as the classical guitar guy. There was me and another dude that were like sort of like dueling, and I mean DUEL, dueling. Like, we were competing like classical guitar buffs in high school. And I remember we learned this one like Bach piece that it was like for 2 guitars and everything like that. So yeah, this is a huge part of who I am. The guitar is an important part of Mike. So yeah, that's my story. Dave, how did you get into it?
Well, the first time I heard electric guitar that I can remember. Now, I've always heard electric guitar music. My dad was a big Metallica, Megadeth fan. He was a big fan of Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, a lot of the heavy hard rock stuff from the 70s, some of the early thrash stuff in the 80s. My dad was into that stuff, right? He loved
bass. Dad, nice.
Yeah, he was based with his musical taste. So very early on, I remember, and I've probably told this story before, but when I was 5 or 6, or I was very, very young, my grandfather on my mom's side, who was also a guitar player, but he didn't play electric guitar. He played like Italian folk music kind of stuff, right? But he's still a pretty good guitar player, and he could sing a little bit. All of my older family on my mom's side were all musical, right? It was for them nowadays, but growing up with them nowadays, looking at families and like nobody can sing or play instruments, and we kind of consider that's just a thing for talented people. It's a little weird to me because I grew up with my mom's family, and like everybody played at least a little bit of something. Everybody could sing. It was like a cultural thing that the whole family could play, right? And that's what they did.
It's kind of an Italian thing in some ways, isn't it? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I get preparing for this episode. I actually watched an interview with Tony Iommi, and he said, my whole family played. We all played. It was like because he's an Italian Brit, right? And he's like, my dad played the accordion and blah 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 blah, and everybody knows how to play. Yeah, I guess it is like an Italian thing, but my grandfather, that grandfather, got me a stereo system. It was a turntable with 2 cassette decks, right? You had the record and you had the playback. And how he got it, he got a bunch of them for everybody. They fell off a truck. Who fucking knows with him, right? He got them from. Yep. So he got me this, but I was pumped, man. I loved it. And my dad, who had a very extensive vinyl cassette collection, he goes, you can pick out any records that I have of doubles, and he had a lot of doubles. So I picked out things a lot of like ZZ Top. I just picked out I'm like 5'6", so I just picked out things I thought were cool. So that looked cool. I had a cool cover art. So I got ZZ Top. I picked out Molly Hatchet. I picked out like some early Judas Priest albums, Sad Wings of Destiny, Rockarola. I picked out you did like a bunch of different stuff. You had a Blue Oyster Cult, obviously Deep Purple. He made sure I got his copy of Deep Purple Machine Head, but most importantly, I probably got 5 different Sabbath albums. Yeah. Right? I got Sabbath. I got Sabbath Paranoid. I got Master of Reality. I got Mob Rules. I got Heaven and Hell, and I remember the first one that I put on was the first Black Sabbath album, because it has like that spooky looking house and stuff. It was just like, I just thought the album art was cool. And I put it on, and the first track is Black Sabbath. And I heard that tritone stuff, right? Now, at this point, I was already exposed to like thrash metal and stuff. But I never sat down on my own volition and like cranked up my speakers and like experienced music. And when I heard Iommi's tone on that album, that just like became part of who I am for the rest of the time. Now, my second biggest influence on as far as electric guitars go was I had a friend in middle school named Steve, and Steve's dad was like my dad. He was a little bit younger, but he was really into 80s heavy metal stuff. He was a huge Pantera fan, right? And I loved Pantera at this time, too. I was all into Pantera. I had all of their albums on cassette up to this point. And this was about 1999, going into 2000. I think it was 2000. His dad took us to go see Pantera on Reinventing the Steel tour in Pittsburgh, which is pretty far away from here. But we went all the way out there. Excuse me, getting over a cold. But we go out to Pittsburgh, right? And we go see Pantera, and they were awesome, right? It was just Pantera live was something special, right? These guys, they were so loud, so energetic. This is late in their career. This was their last album that they did, and it was still badass, right? And the one thing that I remember, and we had really good tickets. So I was like, we were like up in the front almost. And I remember standing there looking up on the stage, and they go to take the band goes to take a break in between their set. And Dimebag Darrell comes out, and he just like plays guitar for the whole crowd. And he does this thing where he like goes, and he like waves to get a certain part of the crowd fired up just with the sound of his guitar. And everyone's like, yeah, he's like going fucking nuts. And he just like starts shredding, like just in front of all of us. It was just like this. It was like watching somebody just like a wizard unfurl their magic before us. And it was, and people started moshing, right? It was like a mosh pit going to Dimebag's solo. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I love this. It was just, it was so based. So about that time, middle school, I begged my parents to get me a guitar. I already had an acoustic guitar at this point that a friend of the family gave me. It was like an old acoustic guitar, and I was playing around with that. I monkeyed with that. I learned to play in a Caravan and various other little riffs and everything. And I was like, I want an electric guitar. So my dad took me to this to the flea market, and the flea market was another big place for my musical, cultural, art development. One of the shops that was in the flea market was this. It was like a little record store plus like a guitar, the guy that sold refurbished guitars and amps. So the guy that ran this place, he was not too much different than like Otto from The Simpsons, right? He was 80s leftover, backwards hat. He had always had a sleeveless like band shirt on, like cut off jean shorts and like high top Reeboks. This guy was right out of the 80s. Yo, what's up, little bro? What's up, little dude? Ha ha! What's going on, man? And he was just so cool and chill. And he's like, yo, what do you like, man? I'll find you the coolest, sickest stuff you ever heard, bro. So he would like recommend records and CDs and everything. He was like a really just cool guy. I don't think he made a lot of money, right? But he was like just one of those dudes that was just like living his dream. You know what I mean? So he was just pumped to be there. And we went there, and we bought my first electric guitar from him. It was a refurbished Charvel. It was like an 80-something Charvel, and it was in rough shape, right? I got that guitar, and then I started doing little work and everything like that, saving up my money. I bought a BC Rich Warlock, an old one. And then I bought, I ended up with so many of these little electric guitars I bought and traded and sold. I had an Ibanez, I had a Jackson Soloist, I had like all of these different guitars, and I had some pretty cool vintage guitars that back in those times were like, we're talking early 2000s. These guitars were like not really worth nothing; they were really beat up. But now, if I would have kept them and refurbished them, I would sell them for thousands, right? But I had all these. I had some old school amps, and I just loved this. I just loved electric guitar, right? I monkeyed with all kinds of old school pedals, and I was just into it, right? So I just, the first thing I did was I wanted to learn Black Sabbath. So I learned a bunch of Black Sabbath songs, and at this time I got into Slayer. So I would just literally sit in my basement and practice playing Slayer. Right? I just sit in my basement and practice doing triplets and trem picking and playing power chords as fast as I could, right? I learned Season of the Abyss and South of Heaven, and all the pretty much every main riff off of Rain in Blood. I would just sit there and just go trying to get as fast as I could. And then my little brother, like you, Mr. Mike, he got into drums, He got into drums. So he got a drum set from my aunt's friend, who's a music teacher. And we had this like little band going when I was in like 9th grade. He was like in 7th grade. And we weren't very good, but we had so much fun. Unfortunately, later on, my brother like got into drugs and sold his drum set and like gave up on music. He hasn't played music since then. You know, now he's a grown ass man.
It happens.
Anyway, it was like, you know, all my buddies played guitar. We all had different little bands and stuff. And electric guitar, you know, long story short, electric guitar was just a huge part of my life, and it's a huge part of my identity. Rock and roll and heavy metal have always been like who I am.
Oh, fuck yeah. No, I hear that, man. Definitely. And I as you were recounting your story there, I realized that when I was telling mine, I didn't really say anything about the electric guitar. I just told you about the classical guitar. So for me, my foray into I'm going to tell the other half of the story that I told on the hip hop episode, because sometime in the turn like between the 80s and the 90s, right on the cusp of those decades, I got into hip hop, really heavy into hip hop, like listening to what was going on at that time. You know, we're talking obviously stuff like NWA, Ice-T, Black Sheep, Vanilla Ice, you know, like what was going on at that fucking time.
You know what? I gotta say,
I ain't gonna lie, bro.
Dude, people rip on Vanilla Ice, but dude, Vanilla Ice was dope. I'm not even gonna lie to you.
He wasn't a bad rapper, to be honest. I mean,
he's still a good rapper, dude. He's just like coming back out, dude. He looks good. He looks young and fresh. He still raps kind of in the way that he used to. He still can freestyle, dude. I fuck with Vanilla Ice a little bit. I'm not even gonna lie.
You know what? This isn't an episode about hip hop. That's a little digression here. Like he actually, you know, I watched like a documentary on him like a while back, and some of the real heavy hitters in the scene, you know, like Chuck D and shit like that, were like, yo, this kid had fucking chops back in the day. He could have had a real career if he didn't basically like pretend that he was from the hood. If he was just honest about who he was and all that shit, right? And that's what kind of killed him, right? It was because when it came out that, you know, he was saying like, roll in Emma 5.0, you know, like it's just like pretending like he's a hood rat or something like that. Like guys were like, wait a minute, you're just a kid from fucking Florida, aren't you? And it just wrecked his career in the end, right? But anyway, he was pretty decent. So anyway, I was listening to that shit. I was listening to like everything that was going on at the time, all the like gay ass R&B, Bobby Brown fucking shit. And the good shit. So I was into hip hop. I was into black music. I was into this. This is what was going on. Everybody was into that, right? And then, of course, everybody knows what happened next. Everybody knows what happened in like September 1991 is that Nirvana comes in and basically just fucks everything up, right? Turns everything on its head. All of a sudden, rock is back. And I am back into guitar music in a big way. And actually, for me, it wasn't Nirvana. It wasn't Nevermind that really turned me back to guitar music. It was Stone Temple Pilots' Core, which came out like the next year. And I mean, I don't need to describe this album. Like 10 out of the 12 songs or something ridiculous like that were like big fucking radio smashes. It was a huge album. It kind of gets a little bit of shit, like, you know, in retrospect for being like, I'm not even in retrospect, actually at the time more than later on, it got shit on for being like, you know, they're Pearl Jam clones and shit like that. But man, that album fucking rules. It's just like everything about it is good. There's not a misstep on the album. They really do, and they do have their own voice. Anyway,
and it's better than anything Pearl Jam ever put out.
Way better, way better. I mean, I like some Pearl Jam, but yeah, that's like of the big four, like Seattle bands, they're the one that I like the least, like by far, that I never really got super heavy into. Always heavy into Nirvana and Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and Stone Temple Pilots. And this Core album, I just remember listening to it, and it was actually like the single Plush. And I remember hearing it on the radio and just being like, what is this? It was like, it was harmonically complicated. It was heavy as fuck. it was just like, it was aggressive, it was cool, it just had this like jangly sort of thing going on. It was well produced, it just sounded good, it just fucking sounded good. And so I went out and bought the album, and then within like 3 months I was like back on the guitar train, and rap was kind of on the outs for me. So that like started me into like a whole, like, it just started me into just a complete deep dive into like guitar music. And bro, let me tell you, being like at that age, like just on the cusp of adolescence in like 1992 was just like, it was such a good time for guitar music. It was such a fucking good time for it. And people shit on the 90s a lot, and that's gay. The 90s were fucking amazing. Anyhow, that got me into guitar music, and then grunge was my thing. And then, as I also detailed on the episode where we reviewed those, each reviewed an album of the other, in 1995, Faith No More drops King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime. I pick up this album, and this represents yet another sort of detour for me. It's a heavy guitar album. The guitar slathered all over everything. Faith No More is kind of like more of an experimental, weird band, but like also with some like heavy guitar chops and everything. This is a super heavy album, but it kind of sent me in some weird directions. Sent me into like a much more experimental vein, where I started to listen to, well, first I started listening to Mr. Bungle, which was the Mike Patton, not side project, but his original band that was even like more, like much weirder still than that record. And that kind of sent me into stuff like listening to jazz, listening to prog rock, listening to like Fish. I was a huge fucking Fish head for a while. Do you ever listen to them? Did they ever cross your path at all? Fish?
I don't like Fish.
A lot of people don't like Fish, but I got heavy into them. It's not something I would really listen to anymore or whatever, but it's definitely like Trey Anastasio, the guitar player, is like a monumentally talented guitarist, especially when it comes to improvisation. So anyway, I got into that shit and everything like that, and then we're getting into the late 90s, where I'm like getting heavy into King Crimson and like starting to discover all kinds of stuff like Yes, and really technical, demanding guitar stuff. And then I sort of had a grunge renaissance. I picked up some of the early Soundgarden albums that I'd never listened to before. Like I listened to Bad Motorfinger and everything forwards, but then I got into like Louder Than Love, Ultra Mega OK, Screaming Life, and all those like the earlier records, which are like weirder and more sort of like Cornell's voice is like even more extreme than it is on like, the later records for sure. And that sort of started me back into rediscovering grunge. And it's actually at this point that I really, really started to appreciate Nirvana. So I picked up like the Muddy Wishka live album, came out posthumously. And that's like a greatest hits, basically. It's still the greatest of the greatest hits albums that have been repackaged every 5 years for Nirvana. And I just was like, holy fuck, this guy is like unbelievable songwriter, just unbelievable in his like tune smithing and his like wordplay, even though it's kind of like some of the lyrics are kind of ridiculous. And yeah, so that got me back into like heavy guitar again. Because you think of like, listening to weird experimental shit and then going into like prog rock, and like things are starting to get less and less heavy over time. And then like grunge just kind of comes screaming back for me, this like heavy ass guitar sound, very sort of like, almost like barbarian, just like simple, like brute, simple, stupidly like one note riffs, like Scentless Apprentice, like da 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 da, like simple, like one fucking note kind of shit. And just getting into like that, vein of songwriting, back into the like, it's so simple it could be like a nursery rhyme kind of thing. And that's, about this time is when I started playing in bands, started a grunge band, and we gigged for many years. Well, not many years. We gigged for about like 4 or 5 years or something like that before the band kind of imploded, mostly due to drugs, which was kind of unfortunate because the main dude, the main songwriter was like such a fucking genius. But that's another story. But yeah, the guitar, and then after that, I got into like playing in punk bands and like playing in some like kind of like weirder stuff. And from there, shit gets very kind of, I became an audio engineer and started like going in a whole other direction. So, but that is to say, the electric guitar is like always been like a huge important part of my personal development. And I can remember some of the turning points of like, watching bands play live and just being like, holy shit, I had no idea that like a human being could do that with like 6 strings kind of thing. And that's one of the things that's amazing about the guitar, is that it's not a piano that has 88 keys on it. It is when it comes down to it, it is a very simple folk instrument. And it has so much versatility and range. It can be used to play like a dead stupid 1-note riff over and over and over again for 15 minutes. Or it can be used to play something like, Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, or Malmsteen, or something like. It can be used for like orchestral music, right? So it has this range that is really kind of unparalleled in any other instrument except maybe piano. But even that, I think the guitar is maybe even more expressive, and that might just be my bias. But it's a folk instrument, whereas a piano is not. Like the piano is not something that you would find sort of like in every village or, like little hamlet going back for centuries, right? Whereas the guitar kind of was, or something like the guitar, whether it was a lyre or a lute or something like that. This was a kind of portable instrument. It was an instrument of the people, right? And it has a long history. Like the guitar and its predecessors, the stringed instruments like it, have a long, long history. Going back to like the raconteurs and the troubadours in the Middle Ages and the late Middle Ages and everything like that, as an instrument of the people. So I think this is part of what makes it have foreverness, as you would say. It's what makes it a perennial thing, and it's what makes it like it's just never going to die. And that's why even now, many like millennia into the human experience, as late as the 20th century, the guitar has been so important to us.
Yeah. When I was prepping for this episode, I was just watching interviews with guitar players, and I was watching this. It was just this one kind of self-made little documentary on YouTube about, it was talking about rock. It was about like psych rock and doom metal and stuff like that. And there's this one old head like doom guy. I don't even remember who it was, but one thing that stood out to me, he goes, look at the interviewer's like, what do you think about now? Kids aren't into rock and roll anymore. He's like, kids aren't going to play rock and roll like they used to, like blah, blah, blah. He's like, where do you think that this is the death of rock and roll? And he just laughs. He goes, man, the guitar is an ancient instrument. He's like, it'll come back. You watch, it'll be back. Yeah. And that's just what he said. And I was like thinking about that. I was like, you know what? He's right. How many times has like rock and roll music or guitar playing kind of faded away for some gimmick, and then it comes roaring back? And it took me down this road of researching. Now, I've always been a guy that I love my instrument history, and I'm you guys have heard me many times make the case for these modern art forms that we love today. I scream this from the rooftops, that these are meaningful to us today in their current form, but these things have mythopoetic roots. These have ancient roots. Everything that we do, that we love, it might be completely modern, but if you dig deep enough, you will find its roots. And the guitar, it might be the biggest example of this, right? We could let's take a quick detour into the far past here for a second with the guitar. So when we think of guitars now, you're thinking Eric Clapton, you're thinking Malmsteen, you're thinking Dimebag, you might be thinking Kurt Cobain, you might be thinking Stevie Ray Vaughan and Kerry King or whoever else, right? Whatever your genre du jour is, you have a guitar player in your mind and a sound in your mind. However, that has lineage going back to time before recorded history, right? We know that the ancient Indo-Europeans had, what are called chordophones, right? A guitar is a chordophone. Chordophone is a Greek word that means chord, like string, and then phone, which means sound. It's a stringed instrument that makes sound. And the ancient Indo-Europeans, both the Indo-Europeans and the Mesopotamians, had chordophones, right? They had stringed instrument. It wasn't quite a guitar yet, but it was a stringed instrument. It was like the predecessor to the lute. Both of these cultures had it. Everybody all over the world had it in BC times. At least, the people that had enough, that were developed enough to create an instrument, because these old chordophones were not easy things to create, right? These were things that required masterwork craftsmanship, right? So the cultures that could produce things like that had them. Chordophones have always been with us. So the kind of the earliest example of that we have recorded. This wasn't the first, right? Obviously, this comes from a lineage itself, but this was the first one that we have written down, that we know of, that we can replicate. And this is the Persian oud, right? The Persian oud is kind of like the forefather to the European lute, right? We don't get a guitar until the guitar as we would understand it until the 1500s. Now, the Persian oud actually comes to Europe in like the 6th, 7th century, right? Very, very early on. And the oud, it had the angled headstock that sat back. It's effectively like a big fat-bellied lute. Has a big round back. It is a very complex instrument. It has gut strings. It has 10 strings, and each string has double strings, like a 12-string guitar. And this is how early chordophones, European chordophones, were for years and years until much later. The oud, which was actually played with a pick, like it's not how we understand picks, but it's not too much alien. It was a long piece of thin wood, and it was called a plectrum. And they would pluck this thing. And this thing was really popular. And it's believed that the Persian oud was influenced by some sort of Greek or Roman instrument of a similar kind, right? So the oud sits around in Spain for quite a while. The Spanish loved it, and the Mediterraneans picked it up until about this was like an instrument, and then developments of this instrument stuck around for however long until about the 1500s. And the 1500s is when we really get the lute. This is like the late medieval Renaissance lute. The pick dropped because what happens is they lose the pick and they develop. Europeans are very, very good at making things much more complex, right? The oud was kind of a simple melody instrument. You go ding, 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 and you just kind of play like one string and do like a little lead melody thing. And that's kind of all that it really did. You couldn't play chords on it because of the way that Eastern style of instruments are. They don't have like the 12 the I forget what the word is.
The 12-tone scale.
That's it. Like they don't have the 12-tone scale. They have like all of these like in between notes, right? That we don't have. So they couldn't develop chordophones that played chords and did more advanced stuff because they had these, which is cool. It sounds very cool. Yeah, I'm sure you guys have heard Indian music or Arabic music where it has these like these weird slides and dips and stuff like that. And it sounds very cool, but what it does, it limits the music to in certain ways, where European music that has the 12-tone scales, it opens it up to more advanced like techniques of playing, and boy did it right. Medieval lute players were some of the most incredible musicians on the planet. Like these guys were really they had these really advanced picking techniques, and they created polyphonic songs and stuff. Like they would have like a bass line, a lead, and a mid, and they have multiple voices going all at once while they would sing. These were very, very sophisticated musicians, these medieval lute players, right? So
yeah, this actually goes beyond even. Sorry, just a quick digression here. Like the sort of discreteness of having notes that fit into a 12-tone scale, so it's not like any infinite continuum between, but it's just the 12 notes. Kind of does something that we talked about on our RPG episode in terms of having constraint and freedom within constraint. Having those constraints allows harmonic freedom that like is just not available to like Indian raga and things like that. And like even going beyond like the guitar for just a moment, like you think of something like Renaissance polyphonic music, like church choir music, what most people would call it, stuff like Johannes Ockeghem. If you like listen to what's going on there, and very early, like basically Renaissance music, it is unbelievably complex and like detailed and beautiful as well. And this is all because of this like discreteness of like fitting the notes into this scale. So anyway, go on with the guitar genesis here.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. This is, you go back and there's guys that have recreated this. And here's something that people don't realize is that this stuff early on, they didn't have sheet music back then. They used tablature, right? They had tabs. I mean, like, this is how they learned in the medieval time. So we find these treaties that have tab music, and people have recreated it. You can go online and find recreated medieval music, and it's
tab snobs fucking BTFO right there. This is the OG, bro. This is like return to tablature origins here.
Yep, big time. So you go on and listen to this stuff, and it's like, wow, it's beautiful. And you know what? When you hear it, and you listen to it, you're like, this is not too far off from later classical guitar playing. This is the daddy of it, right? And it's so beautiful, and the way that they sing, and it's just medieval music was not this like primitive goofy stuff. It was advanced, sophisticated music. It was the most beautiful music in the world at the time, right? And but talking about the guitar, so the lute becomes like as Mike said, the people's instrument. Like people in hamlets had it, villages had it. It was played from everybody from your common folk that would play at the tavern, going all the way up to the king's bard, who would play as the king would go to sleep, right? And another interesting thing, a lot of lute players were actually spies. This is something that was a problem with lute players, and this is why lute players sometimes were looked at with a hairy eye, because they were allowed in so many royal courts. The better lute player you were, the more likely you would get hired by royalty. So a lot of these guys would get hired by competing royal families to like listen in on gossip and conversation and stuff like that. So there's a lot of cool history that goes in with troubadours and lute players and stuff like that. But anyway, back to the guitar. We don't really get the guitar until what we would understand to be the guitar until like the 1500s. The guitar takes on an hourglass shape. And now this is still a lute, but it starts to look like a guitar. It still has the gut strings. It still has pressure pegs. We don't get tuning machines like the mechanical tuning knobs that we know now. Those don't even come into existence until the 1800s, right? But it starts to take on an hourglass shape. And actually the Spanish, when they went to Hawaii, took this early like Renaissance guitar with them. It was, first of all, it had 4 strings or 5 strings, and they took it to Hawaii and they became the ukulele. If you play a ukulele today, it's almost identical to that very, very early Renaissance medieval guitar. So forward, you start getting more guitar shape. You get the flat, a guitar that has a flat back, and it starts getting more guitar-like in the 1700s, where you get what's called the Baroque guitar. And this is you're like, if you see one of these things, you're like, okay, this is a guitar. It has 10 strings. It has 5 strings, which are doubles, et cetera, and it still has gut strings and pegs and stuff like that. But this is where you get your straight headstock. This starts to really look like a guitar. And the craftsmanship on these old medieval and 18th, 17th century instruments is just unbelievable, man. These are just beautiful instruments. They would have these, instead of having a like a sound hole like you have in your acoustic guitar now, they would have what's called a rose, which was this like very intricate, beautiful pattern that was cut into the wood, and they were almost like a trademark for each craftsman that made these guitars, and they were just gorgeous, right? These beautiful instruments, and they sounded the gut strings had a very different sound than metal strings, as we see. The metal strings were a big invention too, but these gut strings had a very warm kind of tone. They weren't quite as punchy and stuff. So very beautiful instruments. And then we get our guitar in 1800s, in the 1750 to 1800, we get the guitar, right? And it was invented, we believe, in Italy, but it was picked up by the Germans. So the Germans and the Italians really go nuts, starting to perfect the guitar as we understand it today. 22 frets. It actually had frets. This is where you get your first understanding of a truss rod. Now, it's not a truss rod in the neck. It's actually a mechanism in the what's that called? The heel, like right at the butt of the neck, where you would take a clock key and you would plug it in and turn it, and it would angle the neck forward and backwards to act almost sort of like a truss rod. The instruments before this, right, that they would have gut strings and you would have adjustable frets and all of this kind of stuff. These instruments were very sensitive to weather and humidity and stuff like that. So you would be playing these instruments and they would just go completely out of tune if it got too humid. So this development was huge with keeping these instruments in tune and everything like that. And then in 1850, you get gear tuners, you get metal mechanical tuners, and you also start getting metal strings. In I'm trying to think, I can't remember the guy's name. Actually, we used to know the guy's name, but the first metal strings were actually originally gut strings, which means that they were made out of intestinal sinews, but he wrapped them with metal for your high your low E and stuff like that. So where is it? I can't remember where he's been. It doesn't matter. But anyway, so this was a big development. So one of the big, like the master craftsmen, it was like an Italian guy, but he was living in Vienna, and he built like the most beautiful guitars in the world at this time. This is where we start getting the word guitar, which we think is a corruption of the word kartar, which was I guess it was a Middle Eastern word that meant like 4 string, because the original, as we talked about, the original Renaissance guitar had 4 strings. So we get the guitar. Well, there's this Vienna master craftsman that was making these guitars, and he had an apprentice. And his apprentice name was C.F. Martin. C.F. Martin later comes to New York City in, I believe, in 1830 or 1820 or something like that. Comes to New York City and starts Martin and Company. And they start mass producing guitars, acoustic guitars. And this spread it to the whole world. Right. This is where we see the dreadnought, hourglass, big body acoustic guitar. Right. So it goes on from there into electric guitar. But I'm going to let Mr. Mike go in before I keep doing the electric guitar stuff.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, at this point where you kind of got us to, this is kind of where the guitar starts to become like a serious instrument, like something considered seriously, taken seriously by composers, where people are really starting to classical composers are starting to actually write stuff for the guitar now.
Exactly.
Whereas before it was seen as a kind of, a people's instrument, an instrument of the folk, something that didn't really have the range. I mean, obviously, amplification wasn't really an issue at this point because nothing was amplified. But it was still seen as basically quite a limited instrument that didn't really have the expressive power of a piano, but at the same time didn't really have a place among, say, a quartet or something like that. So it was not, and I mean, even among something like a string quartet, it would have been fairly quiet kind of thing. So it was not really easy to integrate the guitar into an ensemble as much as other instruments. But then a gentleman by the name of Fernando Sor steps onto the scene. And he really makes the classical guitar into a concert instrument, into a performance instrument that is taken seriously, where he actually writes etudes for the classical guitar. Not only does he expand the repertoire by transcribing, things by Mozart and Beethoven and all these composers, transcribe this for the guitar. So basically, translate it so the guitar player can play it. Not only does he do that, but he writes etudes for the guitar. So studies. These are basically little sort of, it's just what it sounds like. It's a kind of practice piece that enables you to develop some aspect of your technique, whether it's the rasguado strumming or tremolo picking, or all kinds of arpeggios and things like that. Each one of these studies develops some technical aspect of the guitar that allows the it's just an important part of any repertoire. Any instrument that is a part of the classical repertoire is going to have studies where this is allows you to expand your technical range. He writes these, and actually these Fernando Sor's etudes really are quite musical and beautiful. They're actually pieces sort of unto themselves. They certainly perform the function of an etude, but they're also just nice to listen to. So, I mean, they're classical recordings. There's you can buy CDs of just listening to someone a professional player play these etudes, and they still sound beautiful.
Yeah.
So he is an important sort of landmark in the development of the guitar as a serious instrument. And another gentleman, Sor was a Spaniard. Another gentleman by the name of Mauro Giuliani steps onto the scene, I think a little bit after him. And this is an Italian fellow who is he is like the Malmsteen of his era, right? Just a phenomenal technical player. He can do anything with this instrument. Now, Dave, I sent you my performance of a Giuliani piece earlier. And that was many, many years after my peak of technical ability. This was just me, shortly after moving to Australia, just being bored and sitting down recording the shit with just an SM58 or something.
Yeah, it still sounds good.
Yeah, no, I would listen back to it. I was like, it's not so bad, right? But Mauro Giuliani was he was the technical, the Eddie Van Halen of his time sort of thing. Just technically gifted. If you want to listen to some serious chops when it comes to the classical guitar, if you want to really hear what the classical guitar can do, listen to a piece called Rossiniana by Mauro Giuliani as performed by Julian Bream. Now, what this is it is a sort of medley of Rossini's operatic themes. So, I mean, it doesn't include much of the stuff that we all know by him, like the Barber of Seville or the Lone Ranger theme. I forget what the real name of it is, but you know what I'm talking about. William Tell Overture. It doesn't include all that stuff, but it includes a lot of the just really cool shit from his operas. And what Giuliani did was he transcribed this stuff and arranged it for the classical guitar. So go and pause this, guys. Just pause it. Go listen to this piece called Rossiniana by Juliana, as performed by Julian Bream. It's about 12 minutes long or something like that. And then you'll come away and be like, holy fuck, the guitar is really a serious instrument. This can really fucking do something. And so this is kind of what he did. He made the guitar, like, Soar was a wonderful performer and a great, great teacher, basically, a great sort of instructor, and he really expanded the range of what the guitar could do. But Giuliani was the guy where you would go and see him, and just like your jaw would hit the floor. He was like the Paganini for the guitar, or like I said, the Van Halen sort of thing. And he wrote some wonderful pieces of his own. The piece that I sent Dave was called Grand Overture, which is an overture to no opera that ever existed, but it's just a fantastic piece. Beautiful piece of music. So these two guys really represented some watershed moments in the development of the guitar as a serious concert instrument. And from there, Dave, I'll let you pick it back up, and we can move our way towards the electric guitar, which comes in, not that long after the turn of the 20th century.
Exactly. And I do think it's important to note that, as Mike said, the guitar at this point, when the classical guitar and everything starts getting invented, the original guitars, as we understand guitars, were not concert instruments. They were for the people. You got to think about it. Back then, there was no radio, there were no CDs, there were no cassettes, there were no vinyls, there was obviously no Spotify. So if you wanted to hear music, you had to pay for a ticket and go see the opera or go see a symphony. So people, liked music. They wanted to hear more music. So they would buy guitars, and the guitar being such a versatile instrument, you would have common people like making their own renditions of what they would hear at the opera or what they would hear at the symphony. And what happened is you got this guitar culture that, especially in Italy was like a big spot for this, and it's still there today. But you start getting what we would understand to be just like autodidact virtuosos, right? I'm sure everybody had a buddy that they grew up with that was like 13 playing stuff that was really advanced, right? You had there's like, oh my God, this kid's unbelievable. You had virtuosos that would pop up. So this is the first time that you started getting guitar culture as we understand it today, right? And this is kind of where these guys that you're mentioning, Giuliani and Soar, they come out of, right? They come out of this, kind of folk guitar culture, this guitar bro culture, where you would have virtuosos pop up, and they love the instrument so much, they're like, this is a serious thing, so we're gonna show the world. And that became kind of the first, and you see it's like, still, I watched a video pretty recently, and it just blew me away. And it was these little kids in Italy, somewhere in South Italy, and they're out on the street just like jamming, right? It was this one kid with a guitar, and then like this other kid playing an accordion. And then all of a sudden, all of these kids that heard them from outside their windows come running out with their guitars and their tambourines and their little instruments, and they all just start jamming the tarantella, which is like their regional folk song. And people are stopping and dancing, and it's like this big neighborhood thing. Like, that just blew me away that they still have this folk music culture. It was just very wholesome to see, and we just don't have that at all here in America, unfortunately.
Imagine if something like that happened with, like, Paranoid or like Iron Man or something, like.
Yeah.
Could you imagine?
When I was a kid, it was most young guys that were kind of in our generations could at least play a little bit of something on guitar, right? Not most, but a lot. It's way more than nowadays, where like you got like these Zoomer kids that have never even heard rock and roll before, which is a fucking nightmare. But anyway, there's two things going into the electric guitar. There's two paths we must take before we get to what we understand today, before we get to Dimebag, before we get to James Hetfield, before we get to, whoever, your favorite electric guitar player. Before we get there, there's two paths we must take. There's one, the path of the development of the solid body electric guitar, and two, of distortion, right? Distortion and overdrive, amplification. So these two things are kind of intertwined, but they're a little bit developed independently from one another, although they informed one another. So at first, the guitar at this point is now an accepted concert instrument, right? Every band has a guitar player, every band has but as technology goes on and as bands get louder, the guitar sort of starts getting left in the dust. And we're talking 1910s, 1920s. You couldn't hear the guitar. So what they would do is they would start putting microphones up to these acoustic guitars, and it was just a nightmare because they had so much feedback. It just was not viable. You would just completely lose the guitar in the mix. So in the 1910s, what they started to do is put telephone transmitters, like the receiving end of a telephone, into these acoustic guitars, and it was just still a nightmare. You could barely hear it. Feedback all over the place. It sucked. And then they started to put this was kind of like the first pickups. In the 1920s, they started putting carbon button microphones under the frets, right, to give to amplify the guitar. Still, as you could barely hear it, tons of feedback. It just didn't work. Well, in 1932, a guy named George Beauchamp, I don't know how to pronounce that French name, but in 1932, he created what was called the frying pan. Well, now this was a lap guitar, but it was the first electric guitar, and it had the magnetic single coil pickup. They invented it, and one of the guys that helped develop this pickup, this single coil magnet pickup, was a guy named Adolf Rickenbacker. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that name, right? Rickenbacker helped develop the first pickup. Those of you guys that are guitar players will know. You hear Rickenbacker, you think Lemmy, you think the Beatles, you think.
I thought you were talking about Adolf.
Oh, you're talking the other Adolf. No. This is guitar Adolf, right? So he later developed what was the amplified hollow body guitar. It was like an acoustic guitar, but it had the covered top, and it would have the little F like violin inlays on it. And this was the first like electric guitar, and it had this single coil amplifier on it, right? In response to the Rickenbacker, the first Rickenbacker, Gibson in 1936 comes out with the electric Spanish 150 series, right, which is now known as the S150. And it was called the 150 because it costs $150, right? You go to try to buy one of these guitars now, it's like $4,000. But that's what they were originally called, and that's what they were. It was called the Spanish electric. Well, fast forward a little bit. The first really like solid body guitar that we get was invented by a guy named, you guys are going to know this, Les Paul, in the 1930s. Les Paul was a country jazz musician, guitar player he actually only died like, I guess, a decade or 8 years ago or something. Like, he died sort of recently, I think. Maybe he died a long time ago, and I'm just getting old and forgetting time. But Les Paul, you go back and you watch him, this guy could shred. He was like the first shred. He was unbelievable. He was a guitar player. He was a teacher. He was an innovator, and he was also a luthier, which, a luthier is somebody that sets up guitars and balances them and gets their intonation correct. And he was a guitar guy, right? He was a very high level, sophisticated, advanced like guitar guy, not just in his playing, but also in his understanding of the instrument and its engineering. So he creates the first electric guitar, which literally looked like a neck with like the bottom of like a wooden post. It was really funky looking. It was this ugly looking, it looked like a log with it had these pickups on it, right? And it worked. And this is what he created. Well, people that when he played this, when he would go up on stage, people would like make fun of him. They're like, "What the fuck is this thing that you're playing? I mean, what is this retarded thing that you have?" They would make fun of him because his instrument was so ugly looking. So what he did is he took two like fake pieces of a guitar and would put it on either side of this like wooden post that would go down the middle to make it look like he's playing a guitar. And he played this instrument for years and years and years. And it was, really, people would go hear him play this electric guitar. Is really, really unique. So around 1951, First of all, in the late 1940s, early 1950s, Les Paul goes to Gibson and he says, "Look at this thing that I've created. Like, let's make this a thing." And Gibson's like, "Get the fuck out of here with this. Like, what is this monstrosity that you got? Nobody's going to buy this." So Gibson tells him to piss off. Well, he pisses off and keeps playing his instrument. Well, in like 1951, Leo Fender from California creates the Broadcaster guitar, right? Which is the first hollow body guitar. It has 2 single coils. It is, what you would picture. It later became the Telecaster because the Broadcaster name was actually already copyrighted by Gretsch, who had a drum kit called a Broadcaster. So they threatened to sue him, and he created like 150 of these things, and he had to scrape the sticker off manually from each guitar. And like these actually, people that still own these guitars, they were actually pretty shitty. They went out of tune all the time. The electronics were junk. This is Leo Fender's first guitar was junk. But this thing he reissued it, called the Telecaster. So the Telecaster becomes the first hollow body guitar, and it's a Telecaster, right? So this starts blowing up, and Gibson's like, "Shit, we fucked up." So they call Les Paul back up, and they create the Les Paul guitar, but under Les Paul's instruction, they create the humbucker, which is the fat pickups that you guys see on guitars today. And this became the Les Paul, the iconic Les Paul. You could think of a million Les Paul guitar players, right? You got Jimmy Page, you got Zakk Wylde, you got freaking Slash. Like, they exist by the million. Tons and tons of Les Paul guitar players to this day. Well, this guitar did not sell very well. So they came out with the SG, right? And those of you guys who know the SG, right? Tony Iommi, Angus Young, so on and so forth. So it doesn't come back out until 1968 with the humbuckers. I misspoke. The original one had P90s in it. The first Gibson's guitars had P90s in them. But anyway, Gretsch, who sued Fender, got a whiff of their guitar, and they came out with their own guitar, which is called like the Duo something or other. And so Gretsch got in the mix too, right? So Gibson and Fender and a few other guitar companies start popping up, and they all just start competing with each other in this electric guitar race. The hollow body electric guitar is born. And with this, Leo Fender, who's actually kind of a genius, was creating amps and all this kind of stuff. He was really, really, really smart. And he invented I believe it was in 1961, the Stratocaster, right? Strats, Hendrix, Eric Clapton, Malmsteen, freaking everybody. And this had the tremolo system in it. This is where you had the springs in the back, and you had your first whammy bar, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that changed the game. Electric guitars were off to the races at this point. So we don't get to today until actually throughout the 80s, you start seeing, the 70s, most people are still mostly playing old school style guitars. You don't start getting like metal guitars until the 80s. And in the late 70s, it was actually because of Eddie Van Halen do we start getting these other crazy guitar styles. So Eddie Van Halen took a Strat, and he called it the Frankenstrat. It was a Strat, and he put a humbucker in it. He put another a weird single coil pickup in it. He got a Floyd Rose invented and put on it, a Floyd Rose tremolo system. He created a locking nut. He made this monstrosity Frankenstrat, and that was his guitar for years and years and years. I'm sure everybody could recognize the iconic paint job that he actually did himself on this thing. And this is guitar that he played. Well, when Eddie Van Halen came on the scene and Van Halen started getting popular, guitar companies were like, "Oh shit, like this is the next thing." Right. So then you get Charvel, you get BC Rich, you get you get Jackson, you get Kramer, you get all these guitar companies start popping up to recreate Van Halen's Frankenstrat, which later becomes called the Super Strat. So, and then it goes nuts. You start getting all these different shapes and craziness, and then you start getting active pickups, and electric guitar is like completely off to the races, and we're at where we are now with the electric guitar. So those are the big milestones of the development of the instrument itself. Next, we gotta talk about the distortion and how we get the sound. But I'm gonna let Mike hop in here before I go and do another deep dive.
Yeah, no, that was a good overview of the genealogy of the electric guitar. Honestly, I don't have like that much to add to that genealogy. I think that was really good. So yeah, we could just go straight into the distortion bit.
Okay, so what do you think of when you hear the electric guitar? Do you hear the clean notes of a jazz player or an old country western player or something like that? Or do you hear rockin', ripping, roaring, grindy distortion riffs in your head? I'm the latter. You say electric guitar to me, I start hearing Sabbath riffs. I start hearing Smoke on the Water. I start hearing Hendrix. I start hearing Cream. I start hearing all that shit in my head. I start hearing Pantera and Slayer and Metallica, et cetera, et cetera. And we get to this point, and this is kind of this was a long road as well, but this was going along with the development of the guitar as well. So early on, amplification was clean, right? Amplification, you didn't hear distortion. Obviously, if you create, like, you could get distortion with just about any, like if I crank the gain on my mixer for my mic up, it's going to get really distorted and sound like shit, right? Instruments, anything that's amplified sounds like shit if you crank it up too much. And what would happen with the early amps, which were very small, this is when you get your, Mike's going to like this, your AC30s, your Vox AC30s, you get the very early Fender amplification, you get your very early amps. Later on, they start creating tube amps, right? With vacuum tubes to pump as much electricity through it as possible, because music is getting louder and louder. This is when rock and roll, at least proto rock and roll, starts coming onto the scene. It still sounds a little bit country western. It still sounds a little bit jazz. And what creates distortion is, if you guys can picture in your minds a sound wave, it literally goes up and down like a snake. What overdrive does is when you crank up too much power, right? When you have too much electricity pushing these sound waves, it's too much for the amplifier to handle. So what happens is it jams these waves into a smaller space, and it compresses the edges, creating a distorted sound. And this is something that happens in any instrument. So very early on, this is like during the advent of, this is when like blues rock and country western, Texas blues and surf rock start coming onto the scene, right? Dick Dale and guys like that start coming onto the scene. Well, one of the first instances that we know of something that sounds pretty distorted was this guy named Junior Bernard. It was in the 1940s and 50s. He was part of like this it was like a Texas blues ensemble called Bob Willis and the Texas Boys. And this guy cranked his amp so it would get a little bit of a tone like that, right? It would get a little bit of a distorted overdrive sound, and folks loved it. All the Texas blues players would come from all around just to hear this guy. They wanted his tone, right? This is where tone chasing like really started going nuts. They're like, I gotta get that tone. I gotta get that grit. I want to get it. Junior, tell me how you do that. So it started getting a little bit popular. Well, later on, there was a guy named Jackie Brenson, who's a black guy, blues player. He was, he played blues songs. And it was like Jackie Brenson and the Blues Jays 88s, or so, I can't remember what his band was called. But anyway, his Fender amp fell off the truck and broke, and he was on his way to record. Well, they didn't have another amp for him, so he's like, "Fuck, so he stuffed it with newspapers, and he's like, "Yo, this is what we gotta work with." Well, the producer loved it, and if you go look up his music, it was like, I guess it was the only album he ever recorded. It was a little bit fuzzy, it was a little bit distorted, and people really, really loved this. And what happened was there's this another guy, white guy, Texas blues player, rock and roll kind of guy named Link Reyes. Now, he's not really known too much anymore. He's a very good guitar player, but his contribution to the evolution of the sound of guitar comes in a song that he wrote just called Rumble. And what he did was he took his amp and to emulate guys like Junior Bernard and Jackie Brenson. Jackie Brenson kind of did it on accident. Junior Bernard was on purpose. Link Reyes stabbed holes in his speaker with a pencil to make this really distorted, rough sound. And it was like the heaviest shit anybody's ever heard. It was so heavy, like on the radio, that people were calling in and telling him to take it off. They were scared it was going to corrupt children. It was jarring and shocking how heavy it was at the time. If you go listen, you're like, well, this was kind of heavy. It was old Link Reyes created something pretty cool. So this went nuts, right? This really kicked off a thing. The next guy in the chain, Dave Davies from the Kinks. Yeah, I'm sure you guys have heard this. Yeah, you really got me now. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing. That song, he took his amp, which was a Vox amp, and he slashed with a razor lines into his speaker to make it distorted. Well, this was like, this was a big deal, right? This started influencing everybody. And then you go forward a little bit more. There was a guy named Marty Robbins, who is a Texas. He was a guy from Texas. He was like a country western singer player. Well, his bass player, who didn't have an amp, who had to play through a mixer in the studio. The mixer they had blew out. Right, it got a bad connection, and you could go check out the album. Go look up Marty Robbins and just type in fuzz. What this created was this very jarring, fuzzy, heavy sound on the bass, which actually really ruined his career. Nobody liked it except for other guitar players who thought it sounded awesome. So what happened was there this guy named Glenn T. Snoddy that loved this sound. It was in 1961, and he made the first fuzz box. And because he looked at the mixer and he reverse engineered it because he loved the sound so much. So he made the first pedal, right, fuzz pedal. And this first fuzz pedal was like a really big hit. And a guy named Keith Richards picked it up and he wrote a song called Satisfaction for his band Rolling Stones. So what happened here is after hearing that, then came a guy named Ivar Arbiter, who created what we understand to be the fuzz face pedal. He called it the fuzz face pedal. And then other fuzz pedals start coming out. You get big muffs, et cetera, et cetera. And a little fella named Jimi Hendrix used the fuzz face on his song Purple Haze. And from that created this race of louder, heavier, more distorted, more fuzzed out, more rockin' tones from crazy amps. Marshall comes out. You get other amp creators. It just goes nuts from here. And from Jimi Hendrix on, everybody starts getting heavier and heavier and harder and grittier and more fuzzed out. So distortion is part the amp and the tone and everything in conjunction with the solid body electric guitar comes together to create this modern marvel, this cultural marvel that we now understand today to be the electric guitar.
Yeah, and it's interesting that distortion becomes such an important part of rock and roll and the just guitar music sort of more widely. Later on, of course, the descendants of rock and roll will still use the electric guitar, but it also gets used in some very experimental kind of music. Think of something like Glenn Branca doing orchestral music with very, very distorted guitars, very experimental stuff. but just it makes a lot of sense. Like if you think about, and we keep going back to this, but if you think about the guitar as essentially a folk instrument, like people don't think about rock and roll as folk music or metal or punk as folk music. Could punk be any further away from folk music, or stuff like Billy Bragg Accepted or whatever? But it's like if you think about it as a more broadly as a folk idiom, as the music of the people, really what folk music does, what the sort of cardinal element of what folk music is all about is it's all about authenticity. It's not about chops, although it can sometimes be about that, but not fundamentally. I mean, that's not something that is required. It's kind of just something that's extra. But what you absolutely need, what doesn't really, even when we're talking about something like, Emerson, Lake and Palmer or King Crimson or any of these like prog rock bands and whatnot, they still have to have a sort of authentic edge to them. They still have to be, if not, explicitly of the people, they at least have to have that sort of connection to the history and the tradition and everything that is the hallmark of the authentic performer that fits into the tradition. And with rock and roll being essentially like fitting into that kind of broader sense of what folk art is all about, it really makes sense that distortion would become part of that, right? Because what is distortion except for a kind of, flattening out, a kind of, I hesitate to say like pushing down, but it really just makes like what distortion is doing is it's making everything sound gritty. It's making everything sound kind of like what it is. It's basically simplifying the sound of the instrument at its most basic level. What distortion is doing is it's kind of flattening it out. In a way, it's kind of democratizing it in some sense. So distortion really does add that authenticity of, making it kind of like of the folk and making it something that is really, it does kind of democratize it in a way. Do you know what I'm kind of getting at, Dave? It's kind of hard to express it.
I absolutely know what you're talking about. And one thing that the distortion did was it was another kind of step forward into moving a guitar into a more prominent position. As we mentioned before about taking the guitar and lifting it up to a concert instrument. Before distortion, the guitar was kind of a melody instrument, right? You go listen to, like I mentioned about Marty Robbins and the early blues stuff and blah, blah, blah. Like it was not a secondary instrument, it was a melody instrument. It wasn't really there to create the whole sound. When you get distortion is where you get the riff, and the riff becomes king, right? You listen, this is where you get, this is where like the guitar becomes the guitar as we understand it, right? The riff becomes king. This is where Black Sabbath. How could you have Black Sabbath without the riff, right? How many Iommi riffs can you just think of in your head? And this is something that really gave it to the people, is it created riffs, right? How many times have you heard like there's certain iconic riffs that you hear that if they start playing in the bar, people just like everybody knows it, and it's like they like down at them down you know what I'm talking about? Money for nothing and chicks for free. Yeah. I've heard that song a million times, but if I'm in the bar and I hear that, I look around and everybody starts like getting into it. This gives the sound of the guitar. It's not so much anymore a virtuoso instrument or a high-level sophisticated instrument or necessarily even just a melody instrument. It becomes the entirety of the sound of rock and roll and heavy metal, right? And how many riffs can you guys listening, think about riffs. You can recall riffs in your head over and over and over again. This was the biggest development in rock and roll, period, was the creation of, was the lifting of the guitar, the distortion, which made it the entirety of the sound of rock and roll. So, yeah, it gave it to the people. So what happened was when the riff became king. Now, obviously, later on, you get your Van Halen, and then everybody wants to shred, and shredding is based, right? But before that, you know, to be the guitar player, you had to be a trained kind of, you had to be really good. You couldn't just be some schmo that wrote dope riffs. You had to be really trained. When the riff became king, then all of a sudden it gave it back to the people. And, Jimmy Joe Jerkoff in his garage could write some catchy, groovy, based riff. And then all of a sudden he's got a cool rock and roll song, right? So it would very much democratized it, not in a gay way, but in a really based way.
Yeah, it's kind of like the sound of the distortion kind of like pushes things down into, like, it makes it grittier. It pushes it down into the dirt, right? Gives it this dirty sound of like, making it like at a base level where it kind of hits you at the base of your spine, just like at the reptilian brainstem level. And you're right. It definitely, like, the guitar all of a sudden sonically could like fill out a lot more space. Exactly. And if you think about it from a technical standpoint, like if you think about it from a from the standpoint of like the actual sound wave or the harmonic content of the guitar, if you look at a spectrum analyzer, when you put a clean sounding guitar through it, it's going to look kind of spiky. Like it's going to look like there's, definite peaks at certain points. And those peaks coincide with the major and minor overtones and everything like that. But it's going to look very spiky like that. If you look at a distorted guitar, like, something running through a JCM 800 or something like that, put that through a spectrum analyzer and it's going to look way more flat. And what this means is that there are more frequencies represented in the in the distorted guitar than there are in the clean guitar kind of thing. Not only that, but as we mentioned, the transience of the waveform. So if you look at like a recording, if you look at like in Pro Tools or something, you open it up and you look like at what it looks like when someone's playing, a riff on a clean guitar, it's going to look very transient and spiky. So like you're going to get like when the note hits, it goes way up and then it comes way down very quickly kind of thing. Whereas if you play on a distorted guitar, it's going to look like a sort of sausage like wave all the way through. It's a very thick wave that's just kind of like taking up a lot more space.
I love sausages.
Oh yeah, don't we all? Like the distorted guitar, what it's doing is it's making it so that the guitar is filling up all the space that otherwise, like sonic space, that otherwise would need to be taken up by things like a string section or brass or other things, so that you can like you can have riffs that are like, yeah, that's the whole fucking song, dude. Like, could you just think about what the Whole Lot of Love would sound like if it was just played on like a classical guitar or something like that? Not only would it not have the punch, it would just like there would just be too much empty space all around the other instruments and the drums and the vocals and everything like that. So what distortion is doing is it's really making it so that the guitar can kind of be the main vehicle to carry the song. It's really important. Like, this is a very important development in making the guitar kind of hegemonous as an instrument that is just basically the main vehicle for the song.
Yeah, exactly. It's also another thing goes in it is when this started happening, right, in the 60s, when you started getting your distortion. This also influenced the way that they recorded too, because this kicked off the race to see who could be heaviest, right? You listen, you're gonna hear me mention Black Sabbath all the time for the rest of my life, so guys, get used to it. Iommi's sound on pretty much every Black Sabbath album. Back then, that was like the heaviest shit. It was like, it sounded like dinosaurs walking around, and it was because he layered it over and over. He specifically he had his Laney supergroup amp. He had a Dallas Rangemaster treble booster. He used to turn his tone down on his SG a little bit. He down tuned to C, which he was like the first guy to down tune, so he could make this big heavy sound. But he was actually, if you go back to that layered recording to make it sound like fucking mammoths, was you go back to a band called Mountain, and those of you guys that are big rock and roll fans will know Mountain, right? They did Mississippi Queen. That's their big hit song. But their first song they recorded, Leslie West, which is their guitar player and singer. Their drummer was named Corky Lang, and they had a bass player named Felix Pappalardi. Well, Felix Pappalardi was a producer too. He produced Cream. He owned a studio in New York. He was a very successful music producer. He produced Cream, and one of the like trademarks of Cream sound on their records was they sounded so thick with the bass. Jack Bruce's bass, if you listen to it, to their especially you hear it in songs like their recreation of Spoonful. You hear it in this probably their heaviest song is called Politician. It sounds heavy as fuck for that time. Well, he did that by layering Jack Bruce's bass. Well, when he joined Mountain with Leslie West, who he was buddies with, he layered Leslie West's guitar like that. So this is the first time that they did, and they did 10, 12, 15 times. He would just play the riff over and over and re-record it and layer it to give this big, thick, heavy sound. And the first song that they produced was the Mountain song, Never in My Life. And if you folks have never heard it, it was made in the 60s. It was like 1967 or 8 or something. And it was 1968. And it's still to this day heavy as fuck. It's just like this. It's a pentatonic scale riff. And it's got the cowbell with the double kicks. And it fucks. It is a heavy song. Well, when they were recording this song and they layered it all up and they finally got done with it, Felix told Leslie West, who was a young guy, he might have been like 19 or 20 or something, very young guy at the time. It was just like really getting into the scene of playing music. Felix goes, "Yo, Leslie, take this record, and I want you." It was like on a reel, right? It was back when they used to record on reels. And he goes, "Take this down to Studio 5 or whatever, and go show it to the guy in there." So he goes, he takes his reel, he goes down, he walks, and he opens the door, and in the studio is Jimi Hendrix. And at this time, Jimi Hendrix is like, a guitar deity, right? He was like the man. And, Leslie West was like really starstruck. He like opens the door, and it's like the most famous guy in the world with playing guitar, and he's supposed to show him this shit. And he like very nervously goes, "Hey, Jimmy, Felix told me he wanted me to show this to you, let you listen to it." So Jimmy reeled it up and he turned it on and he listened to the song, and Jimi Hendrix like fucking jammed the whole time, like banging his head. He's like, at the end, he goes, "Damn, that was heavy." And that changed the game. Everybody from then on layered their guitars to make this big, thick, heavy tone. It was a very big part. And Jimi Hendrix liked it so much that he goes, "Yo, I'm going to play this big concert. You got to come with me. I'm going to get you in." It's called Woodstock. So Mountain, just getting started. Leslie West, complete greenhorn, complete noob, gets to play Woodstock alongside of Jimi Hendrix and all the famous guys of the time.
Yeah, no, that's interesting that you mentioned about the like layering and all this stuff, right? Because like with the distortion, like what distortion is fundamentally is a kind of compression, right? It's like compression plus, distortion itself. So what's going on here is like what we're seeing is the intersection between technological development and like stylistic or cultural development. So of course, through the 60s, music and even just the sort of cultural zeitgeist is getting heavier. Things are getting more intense. Psychedelics are becoming a thing. Counterculture is really starting to come to the fore. There's all kinds of, stuff that goes on with that behind the scenes in terms of like, political and money ops and things like that. But, things are getting more intense, basically. The early and the late 60s obviously look quite different. But technologically, things are changing as well. So one of the things that's really happening at this stage is that multi-track recording is becoming a thing. So I can't think of exactly what the timeline is, but basically it's like the Beatles are recording on like a 4-track or something, something like this, or like you think of the Beach Boys, like all like the guys like singing like around one microphone kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Basically, multi-track recording is in the early 60s at a very primitive stage. By the late 60s and the early 70s, things are starting to get very much more developed indeed in this regard. Like you're getting these big productions of like many tracks, not necessarily like 48 track, like, that what we would have later with the development of like, digital recording and things like that. But at the, you're getting a lot more than just like one track for the guitar, one for the bass, one for the vocals, and one for the drums or something like that. It's starting to get much more developed than that at this stage. So of course you can do things like overdubs. You can do things like all the layering and all these kind of things. But at the same time, what you're getting is the development of compression. So what compression is for like people who don't, aren't technical, like music buffs or, engineers or whatever, is what it basically does. It reduces the dynamic range of whatever you're listening to of the recording. So the difference between a whisper and a scream is very substantial in terms of its actual volume, in terms of like the decibel range. That you might go from something very low all the way to extremely loud. And what compression does is it basically turns down all of the loud stuff and turns everything up. So, well, I mean, that's usually what happens. You don't have to turn it up, but most of the time, that's exactly what's done. So what compression does is it basically, as we were talking about before, it kind of fills up more space. So the subtleties of like, the guitar work, those like the string sort of like slides and all these like kind of like very subtle things that are going on suddenly become more audible. That plus you can thicken up the tone of the guitar with what you were saying with like Mountain and Jimi Hendrix's reaction to it and everything like that. That plus the development of distortion, which kind of came in maybe a decade or two before that, like the guitar is starting to become a serious instrument. Whereas before, if you think back to what we're talking about in the turn of the century, where the guitar was not loud enough and it was really just kind of getting drowned out by every other element, with the development of technology, this basically enables the guitar to come to the fore and become kind of like front and center, really, like competing with the vocal for attention and everything like that. So, and then by the time you get to something like Van Halen in the late 70s, I mean the guitar is arguably the lead beyond even the vocal kind of thing. So something has really evolved, and it's the confluence between technology, the cultural zeitgeist, and the like aesthetic changes in what people like, tastes and everything like that in the idiom. So we've come a very long way from the guitar just being like a humble folk instrument meant to accompany, maybe playing a few chords. If you go even further back than that, the string instrument that just plays a drone that's meant to accompany an epic poem or something. All of a sudden, through this like, long stage of development, but then technology gets to a point where the guitar basically becomes, that's the main thing you're fucking listening to in the song, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just interesting how that evolution occurs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, man, the electric guitar is just like such an incredible, important part of our culture today that I don't even know like what I would do if we like. A lot of times, me and my buddies, a lot of my buddies are, cohorts are guitar players. We talk about, returning to like ancient times and blah, blah, blah. And we get all romantic and fantasize. Yeah, I'd fucking go back to ancient Rome, or I'd go back to ancient Germania, or blah, 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 blah. And then it comes up like, but we can't plug our amps in anywhere. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's like, all right, no, we'll stay here.
Fuck that shit.
Yeah. So I love it. I couldn't live without it.
Bring the Vikings to us. See what they
yeah.
think about fucking 3 inches of blood or something.
Yeah, get him, fucking bring him here. Let's jam. Yeah. But yeah, it was the electric guitar was also a very wholesome thing for me too, because like I said, tons of my buddies played guitar. If they didn't play guitar, they played bass or something, right? So I can't tell you how many times, especially growing up where I grew up. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, where we didn't, when it snowed. You weren't going nowhere. So, and also it wasn't like we lived in town where you could just go ride your bike to go hang out with your buddies and whenever you wanted. Going to see your friends was a trek, right? You had to ride your bike for miles. In Pennsylvania, there's mountains, so these big gigantic hills that are miles long, and it was just like to go hang out with friends took effort. So a lot of times we would spend a lot of time together, right? Especially during the summertime. We just like crash out at each other's houses for days and just like hang out with each other. And among some of our other activities, jamming and playing guitar together was something that we all did, right? So guys would write their own little riffs and we'd form one another and we'd all get better as time went on. And unfortunately, most of my friends that I grew up with that play guitar don't play guitar anymore. I'm one of the few that continued to play. And I stopped playing for a long time. I only recently picked it back up. But it was a very wholesome thing for young guys to do. It was something that we all expressed ourselves, and it was just a wholesome and a beautiful thing. And at that time, this was when in the 2000s, and going into the 90s and the 2000s, guitars, these big guitar companies start making affordable guitar lines, right? This wasn't really a thing before that. In the 80s, if you wanted a guitar, you had to buy one of the guitars that were available. They didn't really make a lot of good cheapo guitars. And then in the 90s, if you get a cheapo guitar in the 90s, they were junk, right? You didn't start getting half decent affordable guitars until, in my opinion, until like the 2000s, right? Mm-hmm. So we were able to go work our shitty dishwashing jobs or mowing lawns or working for our dads or whatever and save up and get guitars and get amps. I remember my first big amp that I got was I had a PV Bandit, and then I got my first big amp was I got a Crate MX120R. It was a 120 watt solid state combo amp, and it was like loud as hell. It was the distortion was very solid state. It was very scooped, right? Which meant you could do pinch harmonics all over the place, which sounded fucking so cool to me. Now I have like a couple of recordings that will never see the light of day from back then when I was playing. And now I'm like, that sounded fucking terrible. It sounded like shit. But back then I was like, this sounds so awesome. And I had a reverb. I had a reverb on it. It just sounded so. It was just so awesome to me. And we just were able to acquire equipment, especially in the early 2000s. A lot of equipment from the 80s and 90s that was kind of like regarded as old junk at that point, or was refurbished or whatever, you could get for really cheap. And now a lot, like I mentioned before, the guitars and the sound equipment, the amps and shit from that time. Like I'll give you an example. There's an amp company called Sun. I had a Sun amp that somebody sold to me for $50. It was beat to shit. It was a head, right, that I put on my cabinet, and it was beat to shit. It was regarded as like a piece of shit amp, right? I think I sold it for $50. I think I just got rid of it for $50 and got a tube amp. And now that amp goes for hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Oh yeah, those Sun amps, man. That reminds me, I've one of the craziest fucking guitar experiences I ever had was seeing this live performance by a band called Sun O. Are you familiar with them, Dave? Have you ever heard of this?
Like a drone metal band, yeah.
Yeah. So they like worship Sun amps. It's SUNN Sun amps. And the orthography of their name is like Sun O, and it's got like it's got like the echoes. Anyway, so I went to see this band, and like at this time, this would have been like the mid 2000s or something like that. So at this time, I'm like starting to get into like, you know, as I mentioned before, there was like, I had this grunge renaissance, listening to a lot of grunge shit like that I missed out back in the day. And one of those bands was Melvins, which we talked about in a previous episode. And the Melvins are a weird band because they had like, they were sort of the pioneers of grunge, but they're also the pioneers in some ways of what we now understand as stoner rock or stoner metal, because in their 1992 album Lysol, they did something that I don't think had really been done before this, at least, you know, not very often. And that is they slowed the riff down to like, you know, not even something like 80 beats per minute, but like 50 beats per minute, which is like a ridiculously, like that's a lot slower kind of thing. And the actually I think I gave you one of these tracks on that like post-punk episode, and it's just like the intro to this one song is just like 5 minutes of just like drony guitar squall. Just this fucking wall of noise before the drums even kick in. And then when the drums finally do break, they're just like crawling at a snail's pace sort of thing. So this is kind of like, it's what you think of when you think of something like Electric Wizard or Sleep or Earth, these like early drone metal bands or whatever, or stoner metal bands, shall we say. What comes along a little bit later, and actually Earth is sort of like one of the first bands of this, is drone metal, where they basically dispense with the drums altogether. And it's just these guitars. And the guitars they're not just tuned down to like drop D, they're tuned down to like drop A or like lower than that, ridiculously low. These guys are trying to do like the loudest, the lowest, and the slowest, and the most distorted, just guitar noise that they can do. And Sun O is one of these bands. And, you know, I started to get into the Dronerson stuff like around the mid 2000s. I had a buddy who knew a lot of shit about that, and he had a lot of the records. So he's like, hey, Sun O's coming to town. Let's go check it out. I'm like, all right, cool. I'll go watch it. And so what these guys do is like, you know, the stage is basically like unlit kind of thing. And these guys come out in black robes and they've got their sun amps on, and all you can see across the front of the stage is just the lights of the tubes of this like fucking wall of sun amps, like literally a wall. You could like just see them above this wall of amps, and all that's lighting the room is these tubes. It's totally fucking black other than that. And then the drone starts. They kick into the riff, and I hesitate to say riff because really all it is it's just sort of like this squall of guitar, drony, like low, distorted, subsonic fucking noise, right? And it's so low and it's so loud that it's actually disorienting. Like I'm just standing there and just being hit with like it almost feels like the air has become soup. It's just thick. The air is thick and it's just reverberating my skull so fucking loud that I'm just like, holy shit, maybe I should get out of here, man. It's too loud. It was like dangerously fucking loud, right? And then I'm just sort of mesmerized, and I'm like a little bit dizzy because of like the physical feeling of just the air shaking me and reverberating me. My body is just shaking, and I'm like almost in a very uncomfortable and unsettling way. And I'm sort of like, you know, smoke a doobie before going in, and I was like, I don't feel so good, dude. So I had to like actually step out for a couple of minutes and just like have a cigarette and just be like, collect my bearings and go back in and like listen to this apocalyptic sort of drone from the depths of hell that's coming out. And I go back in and I'm like looking around, and like, as I said, it wasn't very well lit, but you could kind of see like people sort of what they were doing and everything. And there's these guys that are up at the front of the stage, and they have these amps, and the amps are obviously facing outward, and they've got their like monitor amps, and then they got their main amps and everything. And these guys, like the audience members who are clearly like big Sun O heads are like standing right at the front of the stage, and like they're actually leaning their skulls against the monitors, and I'm just like, what the fuck are you doing, man? Like,
so weird.
I know, like they were just like, it was bizarre. It was almost like going to this like ritual cultic thing and just watching these people fucking like just drop out, you know what I mean, and into some sort of like some sort of hallucinogenic something or other. I don't know how to describe it, right? And then like after going out, after the show is done, and I'm like, that was one of the weirdest fucking experiences of my life. After going out, I could hear everything clear as a bell, and like talking. You know how you go out of the concert when you're done, you go to a loud fucking concert, and sometimes even if you have earplugs in, but especially if you don't, you walk out and you're like, my hearing is damaged. I can now hear 50% of what I heard going in permanently.
Your ears ring for 2 days.
Exactly, right? Nothing like that coming out of this Sun performance. It was so low and so distorted and so subsonic. Like we're talking about like probably a lot of what was coming out of those speakers was like in the 20, 15, 10 hertz range, like really fucking low subsonic, like the kind of thing that most speakers can't even reproduce. It's so low, like earthquake, or that kind of like low subsonic frequency. This is why
resonance type shit.
Exactly. It was like, this is why I was feeling queasy and like it made me feel bizarre sort of thing. But I walked out at the end of the show, and I was just like, just talking with my buddies. Like, that was crazy, man. Wasn't that cool? I was like, well, what are you doing tomorrow? Like just chatting, and we could hear each other, no problem at all. Right? It was so weird. It was like the loudest concert I've ever heard in my life, but at the same time, it just didn't damage my hearing at all. And I was like, oh, that's what those guys were doing. They were leaning their head against the speaker, right? Because they knew that it wasn't going to damage their hearing. And they just wanted to get like the full effect kind of thing, right? So anyway, this is all just to say that this is one of the things that a guitar can do. Like we come a long way from, the medieval troubadour, like basically telling you what's happening in the province, one province over or whatever, to this like Sun O guitar fucking like wall of subsonic noise. That's quite a range of experience that the guitar can give you. So, it's quite an intense instrument. There's a lot. It's got so much like tonal range, dynamic range, range in terms of what kind of like expressive range and everything. So it is a magnificent instrument. But before we kind of wrap things up, I just want to ask Dave, we got to talk about this. What's your axe? We can't have an electric guitar episode without going into some gear shit. So what's your rig look like?
So I got I've had a lot of guitars throughout my life, and I'm like a modder, right? I like to buy the cheaper. I don't like to buy the big expensive guitars because I bang them around and I abuse them, and they sometimes they sit for a long time. I've never spent thousands of dollars on a guitar. It's just not what I do. I like to buy the cheaper guitars and I mod them out. I get new tuners and I put new pickups in them, and I like to do that kind of stuff. So throughout my life, I've had a lot of guitar. I've had some really cool guitars. Right now, I have I'm actually traditionally a V player. I'm a V guy. I have my main
like a
V.
Flying V?
Yep, I'm a flying
Nice.
V guy. So so I've had a lot of Vs. I've had Jackson V. I've had I had a BC Rich V, like an old school one. I had what else did I have? I had some other brands that weren't I didn't keep too long. My one that I have now that I love, I have a LTD V. I love LTD. I'm a big LTD guy. I love the painted neck. I love the set neck. This one that I have is actually a bolt-on neck. I got it for like real cheap, and I was like, no way that this thing is that cheap. I picked it up and played it. I was like, this thing plays great. So I bought it for very, very cheap. I put EMGs in it, And that's like my main metal guitar. I also have a Schecter 7-string American-made neck through. I like that guitar quite a bit. I don't really play that one quite as much because that was kind of like my death metal guitar, and I don't really play death metal anymore. I have a few acoustic guitars. I have an Ovation acoustic, and then the guitar that I've been playing a lot now. I was hungry for an SG. I've never had an SG. I've been getting into the Doom stuff. I wanted an SG. The SG is the Doom guitar, right? But I'm not spending the money for a Gibson, and also Gibson has gone downhill over the recent years. And also, I have played metal guitars my whole life. I can't really get one of the. I was looking at there's a brand called Vintage. There's the Guild makes a really cool SG, which I really liked. I was like really looking at it, and I just couldn't. Really, I didn't want to put that money in. LTD makes a Viper, but nobody ever has the stock of the one that I want, which has a pick guard on it. And I found a couple, but they were like $1,000 something, and I just can't justify $1,000 right now. You know what I mean? I have like a few $100 that I could drop on a guitar. So I actually picked up this. It's from there's this German. It's like almost like Guitar Center in Germany called Thomann, and they have a line of guitars that they make that are all really cheap. They're all like under $300, called Harley Benton. So I bought this Harley Benton SG knockoff, and it was like less than $200. It came out to be like $240 or something with shipping. And I was like, if it's a piece of shit, which probably will be, it's gonna be, I lost $200, big deal, right? I was like, if it's good, I can mod it out and everything, and I got it. This thing fucking rules. It stays in tune. It's got painted set neck. It's got mahogany body and neck. It plays. It feels like a high-end Epiphone SG. So, and it's got the thinner neck. It doesn't have the big fat baseball vintage neck that I am not used to, right? So I got this Harley Benton, and it fucking rules. And that's the only guitar that I've been playing, right? So I got this Harley Benton. Now, as far as I have a PV Valve King tube head. I have a combo amp, something or other somewhere. I have the main amp that I run through is I have it's actually a cheapo amp, but I intended to run pedals and stuff through it. It actually sounds pretty good for a cheapo head. It's a Bugera 333 XR or something like that. And it's 120. The reason I wanted it is because it's 120 watts as opposed to an 80 or 100 watt. It's a 120 watt tube amp, and it's one of the few amps that you can. And I've read this anyway. I haven't tried it, but you can switch out what type of tube, and you can mix and match tubes. So you can get the 6L6 or what's the other one, the EL something or other tubes. So you get like mix and match tubes in it, which I was like, I can monkey. I never did. I always just run the 6L6, but it's a very, very loud amp, and it sounds okay. It's the kind of amp that they made them in China, and they like the first incarnations of these amps were like setting on fire and everything. Like they like really made junk, so they like improved it, and they made nice ones that last a long time, but nobody bought them because they're scared that they're going to blow up. I think they went out of business. So I bought one of the later models of the Bugera 333, which was like actually sort of an expensive amp, but I got it for like nothing. So I have that amp, and I run it through. I have a Fender FM cabinet that I have it's different speakers in. I forget what speaker. I bought these like boutique speakers that were on sale like years ago. It sounds fucking cool. I have a very cheap but cool sounding setup. There on my old band, when we were playing in my old band, I had my LTD with the EMG in it, and I ran my Bugera, and I had a tube screamer, and I had like a few pedals hooked up. I didn't used to like pedals. I used to just run through the amp. Right. I originally had a PV Valve King, and then I upgraded to a 5150, which is like the iconic metal amp, but it blew out, and I thought it was fuses. I started putting new fuses in it, and it just didn't work, and I didn't have the money to fix it, and somebody made me a good offer, so I sold it off. And then I had another amp in between, and then I had the Bugera. So there was a couple times in my old band when I was living in Jersey, we would play and guys would come check us out and stuff. And the guys would come up, yo, how much did all this cost? Your tone is so great. I was like, dude, I might have spent $1,000 between everything. You know what I mean? They're like, no way. For real. you can get some, if you are willing to mod and monkey with things and wait for things to go on sale and make certain adjustments and everything, you can get some great tone out of some cheap stuff. And in my opinion, that's really where the money's at. If you're that kind of guy that can spend a little bit of money, anybody can go drop thousands of dollars and get the top level equipment and sound great. It takes somebody that really is into it, that can make awesome sound, awesome tone in an affordable way.
Yeah, definitely. And now this sort of appeals to like the old audio engineer in me. And it's funny, like, you know, me talking earlier about compression, everything like that. Like if you'd have caught me 10 years ago, I would have been able to give you a much better technical explanation of that shit, but it's been forever now and I haven't thought about it. So in any case, yeah, that really that speaks to me as an old, you know, sometime engineer that I love to like basically tweak shit and like just misuse equipment and make things sound kind of not the way that they were intended kind of thing. No, I love doing that, like kind of modding stuff as well. But it's interesting because for my setup, I never really had, I mean, I was a bass player for a long time as well. Like actually played the bass guitar in most of the bands that I ever played in because, like, you know, I got into Primus, I got into like a lot of the, like, you know, really heavy duty like bass players and everything like that. And of course, everybody wants to be a guitar player, but like good bass players are like really fucking hard to find. I couldn't find one, right? Like, so I became one and I was just the bass guy for a super long time. I had a pretty good bass setup, but I never really had I never really got like the guitar tone that I wanted until only kind of recently. When I first started out, like my first real serious guitar that my parents got for me when I was a kid was an Ibanez Roadstar in about 1990 or something like that. And that was a decent guitar. The pickups were like kind of like, you know, they're pretty good for like a couple of years, but then, you know, the cheap pickups tend to like, something happens where they just start to fail and sound shittier after a while. So I ripped those out and I put the Seymour Duncan pickups in, and that did me very well for a long time. That probably was like I got a good 15 years out of those. They've basically died now and that guitar has kind of been put away, but it's still a good guitar. If I put new pickups, new Seymour Duncans in it would sound awesome like it did until only recently. But the guitar that I picked up a few years ago that is like, that's my fucking axe now, is this nice Fender Telecaster. And I'm running that now through a Vox AC30 amp. And it's interesting that you mentioned, Dave, about the amps that you were using, how you wanted to get like a 120 watt amp, or, you know, guys really, really like the sound of a like, you know, very loud amp with a lot of wattage and a lot of power and everything like that. And it does sound amazing. They do sound really fucking good because there's just something that happens when you, like, you know, when you turn up the gain up like all the way or almost all the way or something, there's something that happens, some magic that happens, especially if you're running it through a tube amp. It just sort of hits a kind of like sweet spot sonically that sounds amazing. And then you've got to turn up the volume too, because there's, again, it's just, there's a kind of sweet spot where the amp just kind of wants to sit, where the volume can't be, you know, you can't turn up the gain to 10 and the volume up to like 0.5 or like, you know, up to 1 or whatever. They've got to both be up pretty fucking loud for the amp to really sing and to really be where it wants to be and to give you that maximal tone. But if you're doing that with like a 120 watt amp, the thing is just going to be like apocalyptically loud, which is awesome, right? Like when you're gigging and you're playing, you know, in the, not when you're gigging, but when you're playing in the rehearsal space or whatever, and the drums are going and the vocals are just like super loud and the guitar is just like smothering everything. It just sounds amazing. But if you go and play live, that like the first thing that the engineer, the sound guy is going to tell you is he's like, turn your fucking amp down or it's going to sound like shit. Right.
Yeah.
And I know this from like having done like sound gigs and like been a sound guy for like a little while, but like mainly a studio guy. If you're in the studio, you want that amp, and you're doing overdubs especially, and not like live in the studio. What you want is you want that amp to be loud as fuck, and then you can like, you know, monkey around with like mic placement and stuff like that to get your optimal sound. But if you're playing in a live situation, what you really want is you actually want an amp that's like 10 watts or something like that. You want you want a very low power amp that you can just crank the fuck out of. So you can turn everything up to 10, and the amp is like, yeah, it's not going to be quiet, but it's not going to be like overpowering. And ideally what you want to do is you want to take that amp that's not insanely loud, and you want to actually like point it, you know, I mean, a lot of like guys like to have their, you know, their Marshall stacks, like 3 fucking, you know, 4x10 or 6 4x10 cabinets if they can across the back of the stage. That looks great, but it sounds like shit. What you want to do is you want to have a little amp and you want to point it off the stage, and then you can crank the piss out of that thing. And what the sound guy is going to do is he's going to mic it up good for you, and he's going to run that through the front of house monitor, like the front of house speakers. And that is what is going to make you sound like a fucking gigantic lumbering leviathan in a live sound situation. It's very, very counterintuitive, but a lot of times what happens is, you know, you look at like if you see like a Pantera or you see like a, you know, big name band that's playing live, a lot of times what's happening is the guy's plugged into his guitar amp and nothing is coming out of those 6 4x10 speakers. They're just there as an ornament. They're just there to look cool. But what he's actually doing is he's doing what I'm saying here. He's running it through a smaller amp, and that's kind of pointed off stage or whatever. So this is why I decided, I was like, okay, I want to get a smaller amp so that I can kind of do that shit. Like if I play live again, which at the time I was intending to, the sound guy is going to be he's going to be happy and he's going to make me sound fucking good. Right. So that was like, in some sense, like, you know, part of the motivation of getting a 30 watt amp instead of like a 150 watt amp or something like that. So anyway, I disagree. Yeah, well, it's different in a live sound setting, right? Like if you're doing that in the jam room, you want that fucking super loud amp. If you're doing it in the studio, you want the super loud amp. It's just a little bit of a different dynamic if you're actually, you know, because I mean, if the guitar is just like completely overpowering all the drums, it's bleeding into every microphone.
Yeah, and if you're doing if you're in the studio, it's a different thing. But
yeah, I'm just talking about like a live situation, because if that guitar is just like running at like 110 decibels or something like that, it's going to start bleeding into everything. Even like the vocalist, you're going to have trouble hearing them, because it's just going to be like, you're just going to be hearing riff soup all over everything. And this is why live sound guys get pissed off about that. So anyway, that's kind of the motivation for that rig. But also the Vox AC30 just sounds amazing. And then the Telecaster sounds great too. That's I just love the sound. I'm a Fender guy. I just like Fender. I tried to play, I am not a huge fan of the SG, although I like it. There's definitely, you know, some storied guitar players that have used it. I love the sound of the Les Paul, but I cannot play that thing. It just feels wrong. I don't know. Maybe it's because I've been playing like Fender and Ibanez through my entire like career as a guitar player. The Les Paul, it's too heavy. The neck feels weird to me, but it sounds amazing. I mean, I've done some like studio work where I'm like playing the Les Paul and I'm like, that sounds fucking awesome, but it's just not comfortable. I don't know. Not for me.
They're too expensive too.
Yeah, they are. They're definitely. I don't know. I wouldn't say they're worth the money, but
no,
I'm a Fender guy. You know, I just like the Strat and I like the Tele and the Jaguar and all that shit. So,
you know,
anyway,
I'm a guy. Like, I think you can get a better quality instrument now out of a company like LTD or Schecter or something like that. than you can at a Gibson, and for a fraction of the price. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
The price point and affordability, in my opinion, are like just as important as the quality of the instrument. Like I said before, any jerk off can be a whale and drop a big bunch of money and get all the high end stuff and sound like a pro. It's just a piece of cake. And I'll say this: you're talking about live. I went to a show, like, not that, I guess some years ago. I guess me and my wife were just getting together. And this is when like Gent was like popping, right?
Yeah.
And I go to the show and I see, this is like before I really started getting into doom. And I guess the band on the bill, they weren't really a doom band. They were just like a heavy rock kind of. They were sort of like the Melvins, right? They were sort of like they were just like a heavy rock, and they had like some kind of bluesy solos and stuff. They were pretty much like like a heavy 70s rock band down-tuned. Like if you heard them now, you would say that's like a doom band, or a stoner band. But they weren't. They were just like a bunch of old guys playing rock, right? The bass player was this big fat guy that played a fuzzed out Rickenbacker. The guitar players were playing the one guy had an SG, the other guy had a Les Paul. You know what I mean? They had a bunch of wah pedals and shit like that and all this kind of stuff. And it was, here's one thing that, like, if you grow up in an area like I grew up, there's not that many bands. So a lot of times you would go see a show and there'd be a punk band, then there'd be a rock band, and then there'd be a death metal band, and then there'd be like a hardcore band. So it'd be like this like mix of different bands, because that's, they got to fill the bill out. And I go see the show, and the headliner is this Gent band, which are, I guess they did a couple tours later. They were kind of like a local band. And on before them was this like, old head, doomy kind of band, right? And the doom band were old school, right? They had their they had, I can't remember what kind of amps. I'm guessing they probably had some sort of Marshall. They had tube amps with the 4x6s, and the bass player. I remember the bass player because my bass player, my old band, had a similar rig. He had the big gigantic 8x12 Ampeg tube amp, right? The drummer had his kicks mic'd up, and like they were fucking loud, right? They were just old school loud. They had riffs that were just like, just like chugging power chordy kind of riffs, and they solos and all this kind of shit. And they weren't really that spectacular of a band, but they were fucking loud and heavy and badass. And they played these really simple riffs, and the drums were you know what I mean? Just like classic kind of, rock and roll shit. And then
cropper shit.
Yeah. And on after it came this Gent band, and they had a keyboard player, and they had all the like the modulation, and like it was all plugged into the PA. All the levels were perfect, and the singer did high screams, and he sang, and there's a lot of virtuosic kind of shred stuff. And the drummer played a kit that was all triggered up, and it was like I guess you could say superior music, but for me it didn't slap. Like I was like, after hearing these like old heads play this like stoner shit that fucking rocked, it like blew my ears out, and it was just like fucking had that magic. Hearing this Gent band was like gay. Plus they looked gay. You know what I mean? They didn't look like rockers. They didn't look like headbangers. They like the one guy was wearing like a sweater vest, and they had their fucking, remember that like kind of emo hairstyle that all the Gent guys used to have, and they just like looked like f***s. And I was like, how you look is a big part of your performance.
Is. You're right. It is definitely. No, I see what you're saying. I don't really jive with that kind of shit. You know what I mean?
I think Gent is gay. I hate it, actually.
I'm too fucking old. I'm too old. I like anything emo and on. Like, I'm not just saying like emo, but like that era and on is lost on me, basically, because I'm too. I'm from a different generation, I suppose. So Yeah.
Gent is just fucking gay, dude. It all, first of all, it all sounds the same. It's completely dickless. It's just like, it doesn't, like, there's plenty of stuff we can go with the old school shit that you could call wank, right? A lot of tech stuff that was really wank, but there was something about it that was based, right? It was heavy. It was still cool. This Gent shit is fucking gay, dude. I'm sorry, you guys out there that are like Zoomer Gent fans or whatever, but I fucking hate it. I think it's fucking the gayest shit. Play like a few power chords that like really rip and like play some music that fucks. You know, I don't want to hear this it's just like fucking, I hate it. I hate it. And hearing it live, it's just like, and they do like the weird little dances that you saw from the post-hardcore scene. It's like, it's fucking gay, dude. It's gay. Like, let me hear some Sleep, or let me hear some Morbid Angel, or let me hear some shit that like is grimy and grindy and heavy and manly and makes me want to fucking mosh. I don't want to hear this fucking, I don't care how good you are at guitar. If you look like a you sound like a I'm not listening to you.
Yeah, and a lot of it is just so manicured too. Like there's no danger to it. It doesn't feel like it's about to run off the rails at any point or anything. Like that's what I like. That's what I want. That's what I want in music. Like I want it to feel like it's a fucking train wreck that's just barely holding on the tracks and that it could careen off at any fucking moment. Like, but somehow still stays in control. That's what I like. And I think that's why I'm sort of a punk guy as much as a metal guy. But that is kind of like, I mean, that is the opposite of what you're going to get with like this kind of like post-hardcore shit or whatever. And I get, maybe there's some good stuff. Like, I'm not going to counter signal it completely as a genre, because there's always something pretty cool in that kind of stuff. But just as a genre or whatever, it feels so manicured. It feels so like there's no danger to it at all, and I don't like that. And that's what I mean. That's what the fucking we've been talking about this for the whole 2 hours now. Is what the guitar is all about. What the electric guitar is about is it's about getting down and dirty. It's about fucking distortion. It's about compression. It's about filling up space, and it's about like. It's just about being a fucking man, like,
yeah.
And this is exactly what you don't get with that, like that style or those styles. I don't want to talk about the one specifically, but there's just like a whole constellation of like gay fucking supposedly heavy styles that have like come into the fore in the last 20 years or so that I just like, maybe I'm just an old fag, but no, it's not for me. I can't get behind any of it.
It blows. And, you can point and be like, oh, it's virtuosic. And blah, blah, blah. Yngwie Malmsteen was virtuosic. Dude, Yngwie Malmsteen, go watch his shit. He spun his guitar around. He played with his teeth. He's still like, he poured his soul into that shit. Yngwie Malmsteen, he was a performer. And he was like, he had he was like flamboyant and everything, but he was like masculine and like, Mom, don't even like bring Malmsteen up to me if you're trying to defend this Gent shit. Like,
no, it's different. It's different. Like these guys are like doing the choreographed dances like the fucking Backstreet Boys or something. Malmsteen wasn't doing anything like that, right? There was like, okay, yes, it was all like, there wasn't. Well, he did a lot of improvisation, but like his songs were like written songs. They were very much like compositions and everything like that. There wasn't like necessarily that element of like you never know what's going to happen sort of thing, but at the same time there was a kind of danger about it. There was a masculinity about it. There was a kind of like pushing the edge kind of thing about it, where I don't know, like with these like genres that have come around sort of quasi recently, I just don't. It doesn't. Like it's loud and it's aggressive, but it's also kind of limp. I don't know how that can be.
Yeah, I don't think it's aggressive at all. I think it's like just like safe. It's like,
well, it's try hard aggressive. It's trying to be aggressive, but it doesn't quite get there. It's loud, but that's about it. You know what I mean?
I don't know. Like I posted someone showed me this band. Polyphia or some shit, and it's just like, oh my god, I hated it. I don't care how like technically proficient it was just like the gayest shit I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, oh my god, dude, I would rather listen to you know, some like doom guy that plays 4 power chords, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And listen to this shit. It's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm an old too, but I don't care, dude. Let me be one. But Mr. Mike, we have been going. We're on coming up on 2.5 hours. I gotta wrap it up. I gotta get going. So, is there anything else you wanted to bring up in conclusion?
No, I think we covered it all. But one thing I will say here, just for the benefit of the audience, as we wrap it up, is that owing to the fact that we are talking about the electric guitar, what I've decided to do here with this episode, you're hearing it right now, is I'm going to put in the full extended version of the outro song for the Kulture Dads. Usually it goes for about a minute or something like that. You're going to get the full 15 minutes of this song called Sakura by Wilder Pussy, which was my stoner metal project that I did back in the day. So you're going to hear old Mike on the microphone and playing the electric guitar here for you. So you're going to get the full experience, and that's what you get as a Kulture Dads patron.
Based, very based. All right, Mr. Mike. So, guys, tuning in. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Hails and blessings to each and every one of you guys that continue to support the Kulture Dads, support Imperium Press, and support underground-based publishing. You know, you guys are the lifeblood. So we love you guys. Thank you so much for all your support. If you're not supported already, if you're not signed up already, go to imperiumpress.org/podcast. You can sign up to the Gumroad to get Kulture Dads every single week. Talk about electric guitars, talk about movies, talk about all the shit that we all love in this era and before. So go get signed up if you're not already. You get hardback books in certain tiers. I got some of these hardback books, man. They're just excellent. They're beautiful, beautiful books. So go get yourself some hardback books over there. Gumroad, sign up. Follow Imperium Press on Telegram. Follow me, The Bizarchives, on Telegram and Twitter at The Bizarchives. Buy books over at thebizarchives.com. And I'll see you guys next time here on Kulture Dads.